A small village at the edge of the forest is hidden by thick morning fog. Strangers rarely come here, and the locals avoid the forest. There is an old legend: if you hear a wordless melody playing from deep in the forest at night, it is a sign that someone from the village will disappear. Anna, a young music teacher, has recently moved to the village to start a new life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. She had never believed in superstition, but the first night she went to sleep she was awakened by a strange melody. It was quiet, like the rustling of leaves, but mesmerizing, as if someone was playing on invisible strings. At first Anna thought it was the wind playing on the old window sashes, but soon she realized that the sound was coming from outside. She looked out the window and saw a dark silhouette flicker through the fog, barely visible in the moonlight. Against her will, a strange feeling came over her, curiosity mixed with fear. The next morning Anna shared this with her neighbor, old Maria, known for her gloomy tales. When she heard the tune, Maria turned pale. "Did you hear it?" she whispered, looking around. "Then the forest has chosen you." Anna laughed, but the old woman only shook her head, whispering words that sounded like a prayer. The next night the melody sounded again. This time Anna did not stay in the room. Taking a lantern, she went out of the house to see what was going on. The sounds grew louder, the fog thickened, and the path in front of her seemed endless. The farther she walked, the more she felt like someone was watching her. Finally, the melody faded, and Anna stopped in front of a huge old tree. On its bark were carved strange signs resembling musical notes. Suddenly a rustling sound came from behind the tree. Anna barely had time to turn around before she felt someone touch her shoulder. Anna turned around so sharply that she almost dropped the lantern, but there was no one behind her, just darkness, thick fog, and an eerie tree with carved symbols. She breathed heavily, trying to calm down, but her whole being screamed danger. The melody was no longer playing, but in the silence of the forest her ears picked up something barely audible, a whisper. It didn't sound human, as if hundreds of voices were speaking at once, but they all reached for one word: Anna. She took a sharp step back, not realizing how her name had ended up on the lips of these invisible creatures. The lantern's light swayed, illuminating the symbols on the tree. Now they glowed with a faint greenish light, and in that light she sensed movement, as if the lines on the bark were flowing and forming patterns. Suddenly there was a thud from deep within the tree, as if something or someone was trying to get out. Anna didn't wait for it to happen. She turned and ran back toward the village, losing her bearings in the fog. There was a new sound behind her, a muffled rustling, as if something large and heavy was sliding across the ground, catching up with her. When she reached the house, she slammed the door shut and huddled against it, trying to keep her heart from racing. Silence enveloped her again, but now Anna could hear the damned whispering in her head. It repeated itself like a broken record, a song without words. It must be finished. The next morning Anna went to old Maria's house again, still not believing what had happened last night. Maria met her with a wary look, as if she knew why she had come. "Did you touch their house?" she asked without waiting for an explanation. "House? What do you mean?" "The tree. It's not just a tree. It contains a song that no one must hear. Those who hear it begin to see and become part of it." Anna tried to understand what it all meant, but Maria suddenly grabbed her by the arm and dragged her with unexpected strength to her house. There she pulled out an ancient, shabby sheet of music, inked and stained with time. In the center of the sheet was only one word: completion. "These are sheet music," Maria whispered, "but they're not for music. If you hear a melody, then you have to finish it, or it will finish you." Anna stared at the sheet, feeling panic rising inside her. The whispering in her head intensified, merging with the silence of the room. And then she heard a new sound, the same rustling that had chased her in the night. It was coming from just outside the door. The rustling behind the door grew louder and louder, as if something huge and wriggling was trying to get inside. Anna froze, unable to take her eyes off the trembling wooden sash. Maria stood nearby, clutching an ancient sheet of music. Her face had turned white, but her voice remained firm. "Listen to me carefully, Anna," she whispered. "You must finish the song. Only then will it stop. But you must know this: those who tried to do it never came back." Anna was about to ask what "finish the song" meant, but suddenly the light in the room began to fade. A shadow, thick and dense as if alive, seeped through the cracks in the door, filling the entire space. The whispers grew louder, turning into an ominous chorus in which it was no longer possible to distinguish the words. Maria suddenly pushed Anna toward the table. "Play," she shouted. "You're a musician. You should know how to do this." Anna grabbed an old violin that lay in the corner of the room. Her hands were trembling, but in her mind she suddenly heard fragments of the same melody she had heard in the forest. It was as if they were forming themselves into a whole. Anna put the violin under her chin, struck the strings with her bow, and the sound filled the room. At first it was the normal sound of a violin, but after a few seconds it changed. The melody she was playing was not her own. It sounded like it came from another world, both beautiful and terrifyingly alien. The room began to shake and the shadows began to wriggle even more, as if squirming in agony. Maria screamed, "Don't stop. She wants to make you quit, but you have to keep going." The whispering in Anna's head became shrill, almost screaming, but she didn't give up. Her fingers moved on the strings themselves, creating a sound that filled the room louder and louder. The melody grew faster, tenser, until it finally reached its climax. The moment Anna played the last chord, there was a deafening cracking sound. The room was illuminated for a moment by a bright light. The shadows disappeared, and the whispering became silent. But with that light came a silence so deep it was almost impossible to breathe. Anna fell to her knees, still clutching the violin. She looked up at Maria, but she was gone. The sheet music lay on the floor, charred and blank, as if the words and symbols had been erased by a force that could not be resisted. In front of the house, outside the door, there was nothing left, no mist, no rustling, only a cold emptiness and a faintly audible wind. But Anna knew this was not the end. Something deep inside her told her the song was over, but a new one had begun. And then she heard it again, the first note of a new melody, quiet but calling, coming from the forest. Anna sat on the floor, clutching her violin, and listened to the first notes of the new melody. They were quieter than last time, but they had an ominous insistence. The forest was calling to her again. Her gaze fell on the charred leaf, which was now empty but strangely appealing. A faint shadow remained in its center, a faint imprint of symbols reminiscent of musical notes. She tried to recall Maria's words. The song was complete, but what did it reveal? That question stuck in her mind as the melody grew louder and louder. It seemed to sound from within, like her own thoughts. Anna knew she had to get back to the tree. The answers, if they existed at all, were there. The night was frighteningly dark, as if the sky had been stolen. In her hands, Anna clutched her violin and lantern. She walked toward the forest along the same path that had led her to the tree the first time. This time she did not try to resist the call. Fear gave way to a strange sense of inevitability. Every step echoed, though the ground beneath her feet was soft. Soon she saw the tree again. The signs on its bark flashed with a dim light, as if welcoming her. At the same moment, the melody in her head began to sound clear and loud. It was a new song, complex, unfamiliar, but at the same time terrifyingly familiar, as if Anna had always known it. She stepped closer, touched the rough bark, and the tree suddenly came to life. Its branches began to move, intertwining to create an archway leading into darkness beyond which nothing could be seen. Anna knew it was an invitation and possibly the way to the end. Her feet took a step forward on their own. The arch swallowed her up. She found herself in a place that defied description. The sky was purple, the earth blacker than night. Everything sang here, but not in the way she was used to. The sound came from everywhere, from the earth, from the air, from her own soul. The tree appeared in front of her again, only now it was huge, its roots stretching into infinity. In the center of the roots stood a silhouette. It was not human, but its outline resembled a figure wrapped in shadow. It reached out to Anna, and a voice, not a whisper, but a melody, sounded in her head. "You set me free, but now you have a price to pay. Finish what you started." Anna picked up her violin and began to play, but this time the melody was different. Her fingers moved on their own, creating sounds that produced a light that tore the darkness around her. With each note, the figure became clearer and clearer, and her own body began to dissolve. She realized the song was taking her, but instead of fear, she felt a strange peace. It was her destiny to be a part of this melody, to hold the balance between light and darkness. The last note sounded. Anna disappeared. At dawn, the village was enveloped in an unusual peace. The fog cleared. The melody fell silent. People came out of their houses, sensing that something had changed. Only a violin stood by the forest, the only reminder of the girl who had become the last note in song without words. Months passed. The village seemed to have completely forgotten about those eerie nights when song without words was played in the forest. Since Anna's disappearance, there had been no melody, no whispers, no fog. The forest had become quiet again. but the inhabitants still shunned it, as if intuitively sensing evil could only slumber. A little boy named Misha was the only one who dared to approach the village boundary. He was 8 years old, and he remembered neither Anna's disappearance nor the old legends. To him, the forest was mysterious and alluring. One morning he went, as usual, to the clearing at the very edge of the village. There, among the tall grass, he noticed a strange object, an old violin. The violin was covered with dust, but the strings shone as if they had been recently tuned. Misha picked it up, trying to figure out who could have left it here. As he touched the strings, a single quiet, lingering sound came from the violin. It was simple, yet deeply disturbing at the same time, like an echo of something ancient. The boy felt a cold wind blow across his face, though the day was warm. From the forest, from deep within it, came a familiar whisper, "Play." Misha froze. He didn't understand what it was, but his fingers began to run the bow over the strings themselves. With each note, something changed around him. The forest came alive, the shadows grew longer, the air heavier, and the light of the sun dimmed. But the boy continued to play, not realizing that every note that came out of the violin was not his. It was part of that very melody. In the village, the people sensed something wrong. The wind suddenly changed. The trees rumbled, as if someone was waking up deep in the forest. The old men whispered about Anna and her disappearance, but no one dared to approach the edge of the village. Meanwhile, the melody played by Misha grew more and more complex and louder. He felt his own consciousness dissolving, giving way to something stronger. Images began to appear before his eyes, a tree with symbols, a huge shadow covered in howling patterns, and Anna's face. Her eyes were closed and her lips were whispering, "Run." But it was too late. The melody reached its climax, and the violin was suddenly ripped from the boy's hands. Falling to the ground, everything fell silent. Misha stood alone in the clearing. The violin disappeared and the forest became quiet again. The boy returned home, but he hadn't spoken a word since. His gaze became strange, somehow too adult. He never came near the forest again, but sometimes, deep into the night, people would hear someone playing an invisible violin in his house. The forest seemed to calm down again, but in its depths, by an old tree, new symbols began to emerge from the bark. The melody was not over. It was waiting for the next performer.